Hello, this is Shinay Trudeau and Bhavani Maki back for another session of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. Welcome, friends and practitioners on the path. We are so glad you are choosing to spend your time with us today. Thank you. Bhavani, I can hardly contain myself. I'm nervous and excited and so happy to be here with you again.
Me too, because I have no ideas.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So, I want to talk about the yoga of motherhood today because I know that my yoga practice is changing physically, mentally, otherwise, for which I'm eternally grateful. I spent, I feel like, the first 10 years of my sadhana thinking it was one thing, and then after becoming a mom, thinking it's something else. And you are a good 10 years strong on the path of mothering. And I want to know, how is your yoga of motherhood evolving? What's changed and what stayed the same?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. So Nico is going to be 12 in March. And it's so interesting, now with technology and how you get these flashbacks of memories of photos. And he's big, like he's actually physically big. And yet he's small, but he's big. And he's really, it's what I've really had to learn, because he's in that place of like self individuation, and it's also totally in his chart with his nakshatra. Go figure. I'm similar in that way, where it's like I need to figure things out for myself. So we all have that inherently, but it's really in his chart. And so I've had to learn, where so much of when they're little is you have to do things for them. And then you have to tell them how to do things. And then you're always like attuned to what their needs are, especially when they're pre-verbal. So, that's kind of your duty, but it's basically, it's like a loosening of the reins, and really allowing him to express his thoughts, his frustrations, and his needs without trying to fix them or provide a solution. Um, and then even when he asks for help and you offer help, he's resistant to it in his own way. So knowing when to just like let him do his own thing and be strategic as far as just giving him the space to work with his own, like his own impulses and his own frustrations, etc. So it's like really having to let go of control, you know? And then also where it's just like where something is so obvious and so practical to you, if I impose myself on him, he's like, you don't even listen to me. And he gets really frustrated. So it's really been one of loosening and not being a helicopter mother, and like letting him figure out things on his own, even though he's like reinventing the wheel a lot of the time.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so that's a big part of it. And then I would say, as a mom, we were just talking pre turning on the video about how, the open mouth kisses of the little baby. He's like less cuddly with me. And so when he goes to sleep, he has his ritual and he calls in the dogs, and Suchi like goes in his bed, has her own pillow. She has, she's tucked into the blanket. It's very cute. And she's like this incredible stuffed animal, this living stuffed animal. And then he calls Ray in. He doesn't call me in. He often won't even like come say goodnight to me. And Ray goes, go say goodnight to your mother. And then I have to ask for a kiss.
Oh.
But it's really interesting because it was my Kuleana. It was my responsibility. I nursed him. He self weaned. So I would say for about 5 years, it was me.
Mm.
every night. And then there was a certain point where I was like, it's your turn, Ray, because putting him to sleep was really hard. So it's definitely like, a little bit tender that he's not leaning into me so much. And there's a lot of pushback, but at the same time, it's so beautiful to see him connecting with his father.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's like, I guess now I'm the one who's being weaned, right?
Mm.
So,
The tender, sweet individuation process.
oh my gosh, yeah. So it's really big. And he kind of doesn't really want his mother's input that
Mm.
much anymore. So even with his homework, he's like, I'll wait till dad gets home. And then part of it was, I was like, is that because dad's still working? And he goes, you know, and he says, dad, guys, we have a thing. We relate to each other. So now I'm like really on the outs in this way. Um, yeah. So he's cutting the apron strings, he's individuating, but then he says amazing things the other day. He was like, he just kind of offered on his own that he thinks that maybe we're closer as a family than a lot of his friends are with their parents. And he said, and I was like, well, what makes you say that? And he says, well, we bathe together. And it's we're like a big bathing family. Like bathing's a big deal to us. And we draw a bath every morning. We have this wonderful bathtub. I wake up first, I get it hot and running, and then we all get in the bathtub at some point. At the end of the day, the same said bath is refilled. We all get in it. We sauna together. There is something really, I don't know, like he feels it, he sees it. There is a different kind of intimacy. And we're also, maybe because we're a bit of an older family, I'm sure your family is kind of like this too, but maybe you're more old style, where it's like we're pretty quiet, we're a pretty peaceful family. And some of the younger generation parents, they have so much going on. The music's blasting, there's TVs blasting, there's, VR headsets, and the kids are like flailing in their virtual realities. And, so we have a pretty peaceful home that even though we take our own space, there's a sense of intimacy, like the frequencies are open.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's really individuating. It's really interesting.
Mm.
And I have to practice a different kind of patience called shut the fuck up. I'm back to that mantra again. It's like, oh my God. You know? So just being quiet and just being asking questions. So I've learned to, instead of like, hey, I think you need to do your homework, or it's time to do this, and maybe just being like, so what are you thinking,
Mm.
about homework wise, or have you considered this, or what's your plan, tell me what you're doing, what are you struggling with.
Mm.
Instead of like me imposing my concerns, and then my like just wanting to fix it, and
Mm.
my fears, right? It's like I'm really having, and actually he's way more together than I thought. So that's pretty exciting. He's really made huge leaps this year. He just went through a major initiation. So at this school, which was the island school, it's a private school on the island, but it was started by all these hippies, and really educated hippies and artisans. So there's a strong emphasis in the arts, which I really appreciate, but they also want their kids to be prepared for higher education. So it's college preparatory school.
Mm.
And this week he had midterms, sixth grade, 2 hours each. And it was like major stress, and he really took it on. And I guess, in some ways it's kind of funny to me because they present it as this intense thing, but then he was like, he didn't really need that much time for the tests and whatnot. But I was like, wow, he really like took on his own studying and his own initiative. Like he wants to do well. I can back off. He doesn't need my pressure anymore.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love how you said a couple of weeks ago how you were really learning to let go. And I hear that in your stories of like you had said, I thought I knew what it meant to really let go and release, but now I get it, like to really let go and release. And for me, I love how you present yoga as relationship because I feel that for myself becoming a mom. I'm only 5 months into it, but there's something so profound about having a foundation of personal practice to draw from when things get really hard, when my baby's crying in the car seat and I can't pull over and we have 25 minutes to go on the highway and it's like I have to pull down deep to like calm myself and, talk to him as best I can and like touch his head. And it's like, whoa, it being tested.
Absolutely. And it's like Patanjali just nailed it. It's like our capacity to self-regulate is actually contagious. So when we self-regulate, others self-regulate around us. If we're um, I've even been learning this in like the structural integration that I'm sharing. It's like if I have tension in my body, I'm transmitting that into the other person's tissues. So it's so much about resonance and feeling into the other person's rhythms and their own timing and, being able to do that. And I have not mastered letting go. I am like scared shitless. I mean, scared shitless, but, I say that just with a sense of holding my own process. Like, I literally matriculate like, oh my God, he's going to be 12. That's 6 more years. And then I have friends whose kids are like 17. Like they're like, oh my God, my kid's going to leave, in a year. Right. Like, and part of that, of course, is your attachment because they have your heart, they become the center of your world. And another part of it is like, how are they possibly going to manage out in the world? Like, so there's big initiations ahead.
How do you feel like you have raised yourself as a woman and a mother alongside your child?
Well, gosh, I don't know that it's something that is like compartmentalized, you know? It's like my whole path, I've been on fire and I came in with this real, um, like I just knew that the distortion that I was experiencing was some kind of like sticky film that I needed to extricate myself from. And I feel really blessed that I don't know how anybody else feels, but I know how I felt like as a little kid. Like I just had this strong sense of this innate magnetism to something that was more whole. And so, as I've shared a lot, because basically it's been the fuel that has ignited my whole process and what's brought me to yoga, and how, you know, what I've shared has been my own process of finding wholeness and sanctuary and sacredness in the the weird incestuous and energies that I grew up in. You know, so my life has been all about drawing in these synergies, and then, you know, my own worthiness and the shame of carrying abuse. And, you know, even it's like when, you know, when you're raped, as I was, you know, on like on the south side of Chicago, there's like nuanced questions about how you brought it upon yourself. So there's a lot of stuff that you kind of have to peel back around your own worthiness and how maybe you brought it on yourself or something. So, you know, even trying to get pregnant, and it was so hard for me. And, you know, my mother and her own fear from like growing up with like narratives like Reefer Madness. I don't know if you know that movie. Oh my God. It was right around the time when the pharmaceutical companies in the US, they illegalized hemp because they realized that a lot of people's ailments were being remediated through, you know, like the CBD and all those things, and that they were losing a lot of like economic input. So it's like, I mean, if you should pull it up on YouTube, it's kind of
I'll look it
like
up.
but like to really realize that this was the narrative. So it was like, you know, somebody smoking, you know, some marijuana, and suddenly they're like this crazed psychopath, you know, like literally it's like in black and white. And, you know, so these were the narratives, you know, my
Mm.
mother had, was that basically like I was a heroin addict or something because I had done these things. And so she would say things to me like, you know, and she was afraid, you know, she came from a totally different generation. She would say that she hoped I never had children because they would be horribly disformed and disfigured and they would be retarded.
God.
That was like a major wound, okay, for me, you
Yeah.
know? And then I kind of like it, then it kind of, I carried it like a curse.
Mm.
And then going through 7 years of not understanding why I couldn't hold a pregnancy, and, you know, my mother saying things like, we'll never know what you could have been, because speaking of regret, we'll never
Yeah.
know what you could have been because of all the, like, you know, the psychoactive plant medicines that I took. And I get it. Like, she came from a
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
different generation, you know, but it took me a long time. Like, there was so much shame, and like, is God punishing me? Or, you know, it was really, really deep.
Hmm.
So, you know, as I was like going through this process and it was so painful, like, what better thing to do than to like throw myself into a project, which became the Yogi's Roadmap.
Mm.
And it was like, you know, when I look at it, it's like we only understand our life and backwards.
Mm.
And literally, I mean, you can understand this in a really raw way. Nico was like days old. Just before he had been born, I was invited to teach at this TED Med conference in Washington, D.C. Like, it was a very prestigious event. And I think I shared this. I was really torn because it was like, wow, this is a huge opportunity, but I'm going to have a newborn. Like, I'm going to have a baby. And like, do I give up this opportunity? And then Nico came to me in a dream.
Mm.
He was already born. And he was like, oh, was he already born? Maybe he was, because I think he was just at the age where he was allowed to travel, which was like 12 weeks.
Whoa.
Like he was so little. Okay.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I want to go, you know? So I ended up like, you know, we ended up buying a ticket for Ray. They put us up in a 5-star hotel, and he was there. And it was like my manuscript was done, but it was put on the back burner because I had a newborn. So all of a sudden I had to like format this book. And, I was sitting there like leaking everywhere. I ended up like getting mastitis because
Oh,
I was holding him. We're in the tropics. I wasn't changing the nipple covers. He got thrush. Like it was just a mess. But I was like under the gun to put out this book. And
mm,
so literally, like he came into the world. The book needed to be birthed into completion. And, I looked back and I was like, wow, man, like like literally he was putting me through all of that because as you know, it's like you can't share the teachings of the sutra or study them without them working on you on the inside out. So I just was like, oh my gosh, like
mm,
all of this is happening. And I had to really go through lots of layers of narratives and shame and worthiness um, to have that privilege of like birthing love into the world. I don't know if I'm expressing this well.
I understand.
You, yeah, yeah, so I can just kind of see like where I've been searching for synergies, and pulling all these different threads to kind of get back to the heart stream.
Mm,
Yoga. I can also, it's like wonderful to look at the magic and the 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 unfolding of your own life in hindsight and just be like, wow, look at all these layers and how they've woven together. Right. That's
mm,
the Tantra, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah.
You didn't see how that was connected to that, but then you're like, oh wow, look how that wove so perfectly
The
together.
magic of synthesizing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to your credit, I don't hear you talk negatively about your mom. So I feel like you've really done whatever work you needed to do. I hear in your voice there's regard and healthy individuation. So whatever that's worth, um, congratulations.
It's been a
Kudos.
hell of a ride.
Yeah.
It's been a hell of a ride. And it was kind of like an interesting blessing in disguise, but my mother had some kind of a health issue with her carotids, and then they put her on steroids, and then she really went kind of wacko.
Mm.
Without going too deep into the story, it blew up the issues really bad.
Wow.
And she ended up like disowning me.
Wow.
In this, throughout my whole life, she's written these letters that are like 13 pages long, character assassinations of me.
Whoa.
Yeah, my mother has a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Um, so I have compassion for that. But it's like, and these character assassinations of me, which was that like, because I didn't take the path that was carved out for me. And it was really a clear path.
Mm.
Like it was very clear, I didn't do any of it. I never do any of it the way I'm supposed to do. It's in my chart too. It's like almost comical. So here I am, like I graduated high school in 3 years in one of the most prestigious high schools in the country, ended up like acing my SATs, ACTs, was going to get full scholarships like to any Ivy League school I want to go to, ended up doing like half a year of college and dropping out. Like I have a high school degree. You know what I'm saying? And spent like all this time studying. I have nothing to show for it, except like a handwritten letter from a teacher saying that I could teach intermediate series, like nothing. And so it's really like frustrating to my mother, like, why, and it was her worry. Like,
Hmm.
how am I going to make it?
Hmm.
Which is a good worry. I
Yeah, but
learned
look.
not to worry because it's crazy making. I mean, there's magic. But anyway, in that process where she wrote this final letter, which was like on steroids, literally, and she disowned me and she disowned Nico because he was my son. She said, even though he doesn't deserve it. No, it was so incredibly out there.
Yeah,
And I was devastated. Honestly,
yeah,
I just wept for a year because, it's like, especially when your heart's been opened as a mother, like, what could your child possibly do? It's so out of alignment with how we're wired as mothers.
hmm,
But honestly, unfortunately, I was in great therapy. And it helped me to really see like how deep the trauma was
yeah.
and the resultant personality disorder that had ensued. Um, that literally I got to mourn her death before she died.
Mm,
And that was very, very heavy. It was actually physical for me. Like, I threw out my back
mm.
in a really bad way. Um, just like turning to pick up a cushion right at my umbilicus,
Whoa.
which I didn't even get till months later. Um, but if I hadn't gone through that process, it's likely she would have died and I would have carried all of this shame.
Hmm.
But having it blown up that big, I was able to like actually cut my own cord, or it was cut for me, and then come back from a place of compassion because personality disorders are unmetabolized trauma.
Hmm.
She didn't have what I had.
Yeah.
She didn't have those vehicles. And since then, she's very proud. She won't apologize.
Mm.
But I've been able, it's like we have a new container that we can connect with each other, which just started with, happy holidays, happy birthday.
Mm.
Then it became like calling and her speaking Swedish to Nico and Nico responding. And, that like that child really becomes the healer.
Mm.
We've slowly been able to foster a relationship in which I'm no longer looking to her for something that she just can't give me,
Hmm.
and really people people actually do the best that they can. They just don't have the skills. That's something that's really changed for me with mothering,
Mm.
is to really see that like if Nico is resisting something, it's because he doesn't feel like he has the skills. It's not because he doesn't want to do it. And that we inherently actually want to do the best that we can. It's just
Hmm.
oftentimes we don't know how to do it or we're struggling. Um, so yeah, it's actually been really beautiful to come to this circle, but it took a lot and it was one of the most devastating experiences I actually ever had,
Mm.
going through that with my mother.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that. I feel that so deeply as this little being brings so much healing for both my husband's family and my family. He was estranged from his parents for all and his sisters for a long, long time. And just this past Thanksgiving, his sister drove all the way from Iowa to Arizona with no strings attached. It was the sweetest visit I've ever encountered with his family. And it was really, those gestures mean a lot. Even just the, happy holiday text message or phone call or.
It does. I think
Yeah.
it brings us back to our core essence
Yeah.
of really wanting to return to the innocence, right? And the
Mm,
greater the legacy, of just growing. I mean, I really feel the world would be a depraved place without children. It's like
mhm,
children just really bring that innocence back, and they're not
mm,
so and even when they're calculating, it's pretty direct. Even when they're
mhm.
manipulative, it's pretty transparent.
It is. And
Skilled in their manipulations yet.
yes, not skill, the manipulation. Yeah, it's innocence. Jesse looked at our son, Luca, and he was like, he's so beautiful. He's so beautiful. And I'd sat with that all day, and he came home. Jesse came home from work, my husband, and I said, I think innocence is beautiful. There's a real innocence there, and isn't that the yogic um, practice to see clearly what is? Without all of, like you were saying, I loved how you said the film, the the film that you were trying to extricate and remove.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sense of spa bhava.
Mm,
Spa is yourself, and bhava is like feeling yourself, and spa meaning that sweetness. Like, if there's poisons, it's the shame. It's the shame, and then it's the indifference and the callousness. It's like all these layers of scar tissue, psychic scar tissue that develop. And then that shedding process, or it's not even necessarily shedding, it's just being able to fluff up these layers and still be able to move from your core and have all these sleeves. Yeah. But isn't that like kind of the beauty of motherhood? Is like you really see through different eyes. You're like, wow, all these people used to be babies.
there were things I just didn't understand. I just didn't get it until literally my son was born, and I'm like, oh, oh, they were right.
It's a ripening process. Yeah,
Mm,
amazing.
mm. I'm going to save the last question till next time, but I want to know if you have any closing thoughts on the yoga of motherhood. I feel so inspired by the teachings of yoga and the Yoga Sutra in particular. And I remember, I think I told you this, lying in bed those first few weeks when Luca was so little and just saying, "Oh my God, the sutra are about birth. Like it's about birth. Like Hatha yoga, I'm not the first, I'm not the last, but I am the next." And for me it was about, all of the vritti dealing with, what's useful fear and what's not useful fear. And kind of parsing that apart, and like that the avashtanam, like when we finally come to land, uh, I just felt like those first, I mean, I want to say weeks, but maybe it was months. Luca was shaking the whole time he wasn't asleep. Like he was just unwinding. And every time I like give him a little massage on his back or his feet, all of his body would start tremoring in this like beautiful kind of unwinding way. But I was like, whoa, we're just here to land. And then, my husband, he says these offhanded, profound things. And he's like, oh, it takes our entire lifetime to become ourselves. And I'm like, yep, yep, it does.
And also that shaking is where and I remember reading this somewhere reputable. Maybe it has been refuted since then, because science is growing so much, that when we're born, like all the neural pathways haven't formed because it would just be too traumatic for our heads to be pushed through the birth canal. So
Mm.
those first their nervous systems are literally popping and expanding and just like like it's like this wild jungle diversifying all these little tendrils, so they're literally like percolating their way into this blobby body, this little structure of, primal kula, what is it? It's kula subcutanea, the fascia that like creates everything, the stuff, the chitta, um I would say, as Nico's getting older, I am holding space for him and for what is
Mm.
his own innocence. I would, it's like, because he has a very, he's an unusual child, it's like when he was little and we were just outside, I suddenly he would just be holding a wild bird in his hands like a dove, like he
Wow.
has that kind of a nervous system. He's a subtle being. He would tell me he saw angels, and
Mm.
there used to be an angel, apparently, that a fairy angel that lived near one of the bushes near Yoga. And, we would go down there and he was like, tell me, her name was Lalu Lilu. And, I was like, oh, does she talk to you? And he said, yes, but you can't understand her. She, you can't speak her language. I speak her language. And so, he would have all of this like mystical kind of visions, and he has a very, very pure soul. And so I'm just trying to like help him stay intact.
Mm.
And a lot of that is giving him space to do that, and giving him space to express, and to stop like mother smothering him,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is really like it's our instinct, but it's like the mother, like we just spoke about in the Yoga Sutras, like the ashramas. It's like, there's different phases. So he's actually coming, oh wow. Because they say the first 6 years of life is the infancy of childhood,
Mm.
middle six. So from 6 to 12 is their middle age. And now he's coming into like his senior. I mean, he's still so little, it seems ridiculous to say
Mm.
it, but he's coming into a whole other phase. His body's changing, things are sprouting, you know. So I just have to back off and trust him,
Mm.
because if I don't, he's not going to trust himself and he's not going to trust me.
Mhm.
Yeah. Luckily, I've got a good husband who's a good father. I think
Mm.
it'd be really hard raising a son as a single mother. And really, my hat's off to everybody out there doing that.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Until next time.
Aloha.